have been well trained.
No.
You don't have to carry a sword to be powerful.
I won't fail you.
Or do not.
I'm not afraid.
There is no try.
Hello everyone and welcome to our very first foray into Dice-ect the Deck. What we have here is two players from the Chansky family who have selected some of the top decks from some recent regionals. On the left of the screen you have Diso playing the Hero Mill that took the runner-up spot at the Portland Regional, and this is the Yoda, Rieekan, Jedi Partisan deck. And on the right of the screen, you have Seth, who is playing the Elite Talzin, Elite Kylo from the two-player set. So welcome, guys, and thanks for playing along.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us on. Absolutely.
So these two have already played this game, so what we're going to do is provide commentary based on the gameplay that they experienced and trying to analyze some of the decisions that they made all the way back to the opening mulligan of the game. So we're going to start here with Diso's hand.
So, with this first opening hand, as with pretty much any hero mill, the main thing you're really looking for is C3PO, because he allows me to turn any of my dice into anything that I want them to be. And go ahead for you, Seth.
The Indomitable is obviously not a first-turn play. Also, this is a mill deck, so I didn't really want to see it at all. I chose to keep the Force Wave, thinking that if I could generate a resource that I could play early, and since you have three characters, it'd always be a great choice. I chose to get rid of the Isolation, which is an interesting choice because the only dice that you're generally going to play in this is your support dice, so the Isolation does have some good targets, but I figured if I popped up with a different removal, it would be a good option anyway.
And I kept air superiority because I wanted to make sure that I had some way to generate some shields, just in case I didn't pull anything that was going to allow me to mitigate your dice, which, with the exception of hyperspace jump, I didn't. So I did get a whole lot of opportunity for shields, though, with caution, and I believe that's an entrenched on there as well.
Sure is. I think you played, out of the two games we ended up playing, I think you played 4 entrenched.
So before we get too far into the gameplay, let's just talk briefly about the drive behind each of the decks. What's the main mechanic that you're trying after? And we'll go first with Diso in the Hero Mill deck.
Okay, so Hero Mill, this deck is not a huge variation from the previous Hero Mill. You're switching out for your blue, you're going to switch out for Yoda, because Yoda's specials enable us to control our own die, mill from the top of our opponents, get a resource if we need that, get a shield. We have Rieekan, who has the ability to mill just 2 right off the bat if you have shields on Yoda and on Jedi Partisan. And then our Jedi Partisan, the goal with him is to hopefully, as early as possible, get the Protective Mentor onto him, which I did not have as much luck with in these 2 games, and use him to take some hits and then hopefully get some of his indirect damage off so that you can use him to mill as well. He also has a discard from hand on his die side, so there's not a whole lot that's negative with that die when you're putting it into a mill scenario. Usually you are going to end up with the shields, and so using Rieekan, you're going to want to put them on each of your characters. And like I said, we're going straight for C3PO so that I can get any of my dice and turn them into discard from hand if I need to.
Yeah, the Talzin Kylo deck is making a splash both in the regional recently, but then also a lot of other people are talking about it online. The idea is Kylo hits hard, has great dice, has great ability. It did prove to be rather difficult against a 3-color deck, as will happen, but you have a lot of monocolor decks in the current meta. The Talzin ability, this current build has 28 even-costed cards, and then the 2 Sith holocrons. turns. So the chance of seeing something odd costed on your own deck is amazing, which is the idea. You want to turn your own dice, do more damage. The crystal ball that's in here, I think I've seen some people question why still play crystal ball if you're going to just load up your deck with odd cards. The crystal ball will allow you to check your opponent's deck first to see if they have an odd card, and then you can choose the scenario whether you want to turn one of your own dice or whether it's more important to turn one of your opponent's dice. I do some damage and focus some dice and use the Talzin ability as many times as possible.
So in this first game here, it looks like Seth, you won the initial roll-off.
Yeah, it didn't last long, as we'll find out. But I did win that roll. I don't want that the other battlefield, and she's not going to do damage. Both of us are running battlefields that are going to be specifically good for our own deck.
Mm-hmm. But which did allow her to get the shields early on, which gives Rieekan that early ability to discard 2 off the top of the deck every time he's activated.
That's correct. Usually people, like I said, they're not going to choose to give you the ability to discard 1 from their hands. And the great thing is that it is not... It's an ability that you're going to want to use in the late game more than you need to use it in the early game. Early game, you can rely on milling off the top of their deck. And if you never get your battlefield, it's still okay, just because C-3PO can make that difference for you.
This one here, we want to hear from the viewers. Tell us what you think about the decisions that are made. I did choose to play a second Sith Holocron. I wanted to make sure that I hit that special to drop the Force Wave. I did wonder early on whether this was a misplay and if I could have just gotten away with 1 Sith Holocron here. This build, this first game, I actually hit I missed this first call out. I think I called blue, which, knowing the deck list and knowing the deck now, red and gray are the proper calls for this deck. I saw the hyperspace jump. I had no idea that she had both of them, but once I saw them, if I see discard sides on Talzin, I think I should have used those to avoid her casting the hyperspace jump early and avoiding a lot of damage.
So usually, the reason I chose to put a caution out here and give up a potential 1 mil with the Jehah Partisan is that usually folks tend to go for General Rieekan first. It slows down on how fast you can mill the top of the deck. However, that's not what Seth chose to do. He's just such a tasty little target over there that I think that even more so than Padme, that makes this mill deck harder to choose a good target in the early game.
So for those who aren't familiar, Talzin's ability, Jason just hovered over the card, but you choose after activation to look at either your opponent's deck or your deck. If the card, you reveal 1 card off the top, you actually just look at, so you don't reveal it to your opponent. If it is if it's an odd costing card, then depending on the deck you looked at, you turn 1 of that player's dice to any side.
I think this was the only time, maybe one of 3 times, I rolled a special on Yoda. Yoda has the ability that you can do 2 of the following. You can discard the card off the top of the deck, get a resource, get a shield, or turn 1 of your dice to another side. Of course, in this, it's going to be used primarily not just for milling, but also to get me the resources I need so that as he's rolling out all of this damage and it's looking really ugly for me, I've got that hyperspace jump just sitting in my hand, 2 of them actually.
That's exactly what happened this That's exactly what happened this first turn. I ended up seeing a lot of damage. I knew that she had the hyperspace jump. When Talzin rolled out the 2 natural discard sides, I should have just discarded them. I got too greedy trying to see as much damage as possible, but I still had a lot of damage showing on these dice. She didn't have any specific removal this first turn, but she didn't use it because she didn't need it, because even after milling me 3 cards, then she still got to end the turn and avoid all of my damage.
So I primarily just tried to use as many of my, knowing that I was going to end this turn, I tried to use as many of my dice, get them off the table as I could, so that I got the most out of this turn, and hopefully my opponent got less. This first time, the first game, this worked out pretty well for me, and definitely forced him to spend 3 cards in his hand. I got 3 cards off the top of his deck. That's 6 cards towards my win condition already. And so it worked really well. Plus, it got my battlefield back out, which, is always good for me.
She, we counted it. We didn't zoom in on all the dice here, but she avoided 10 damage here. Again, obviously, whether I had the second holocron or not was a misplay. Who knows? I don't think that was a big deal. But knowing that I saw hyperspace jump and choosing not to resolve the discard sides on Talzin was a mistake. I still could have had a similar setup turn and got some damage in. I obviously didn't know about the second hyperspace jump, but if I could have hit both of them, this game would have been increasingly different.
It's really interesting now that we've gotten to the point of legacies and have such a large card pool that some cards that we used to think were kind of one-off tricks and gimmicky are now have so many similar cards that work within that suite. So the amount of shield generation that this mill deck can take care of is pretty amazing, because there's so much of that now.
I was thinking shield generation, and it's not in this deck, so I'll make it a quick discussion, but just the idea that Vibro Knife used to scare people away from playing many shield generating cards. Now, not only do you get to play more shield generating cards, but in addition to that, you're playing a lot of different. You're not just, every deck isn't just blue. Not every blue deck isn't just melee focused. So. Here, I did know, I believe it was this game. We'll see when the play comes up, but I knew I was playing against yellow, so I knew that easy pickings is something I want to watch out for, and so doing the damage at the right time helps me to, one at a time rather than saving up for a big damage turn.
What was your thought process behind going after Yoda first?
I've extensively played against a eYoda, Rieekan deck, so 2 dice on each, and that one relies more heavily on Yoda's ability than it does Rieekan's ability. And the thing about, Yoda's only 1 die here. Going back, maybe Rieekan was the target. I still feel like Yoda's die allows survivability, but at the same time, Rieekan's die has the 2 shields. So I think it may have just been the fact that every deck I've played against with Yoda, his support ability is so strong that it's just hard to, not go after him first. So there was the easy pickings, the last 2 dice.
So I used the easy pickings, even though his dice at that point weren't showing damage, because I have the force wave sitting out there. That's obviously way more detrimental for me than I want to deal with at this point early in the game. And then getting rid of a Kylo die is, always pretty useful. So that's why I chose to use it at that point. He was smart enough to know not to leave 2 melee sitting out there for me to grab. So I figured I might as well use it to the best of my ability at this point.
She says that, but I fell into that trap later on this video. The force wave can really wreck, not wreck this deck specifically. It is 3 characters, which is great, but instead of instead of having the shields on all the characters, the force wave can help keep those shields down, as well as dealing some heavy damage to a target. So this one also backfired. At this point, I didn't have my Kylo dice, so I didn't have the damage showing. But I chose to use Talzin's ability to check her deck. Was lucky enough to hit the odd. But then once I turned the Jedi Partisan to a blank to avoid the extra mill, instead she just cautioned the die and regenerated her shields anyway. One decision that was important to make the entire time, knowing that you're playing against Mill, is your discards to reroll are such tough decisions because you always want to maximize your dice. You're playing against a clock that you're going to mill out, but in addition to that, you don't want to help them towards their cause.
So for me, the hardest decision was this deck runs pretty, even with Yoda, runs pretty tight on resources. So I felt it relied a lot on shields and not as much removal as I normally am used to on a mill deck. So paying for all of that and managing the resources appropriately, especially later on when I don't have Yoda anymore to generate those resources, and since I don't roll specials on Yoda, made it a little difficult to make some of the decisions. We did note that when we went back, we definitely would have gone over on time, which, is always going to go against a mill player. So just in case anyone notices that as we're going, these games are going to run a little longer than if you were playing across from somebody at a tournament. But we wanted to make sure to give the best decision-making that we could as we were going through.
Yeah, and again, it's tough, as we discussed before we recorded the audio, it's tough to say that if we would have gone on time, it would have ended up differently. We won't spoil the exciting ending to both these games. They actually were both really close. But obviously, if you know that you're timing the game, then you're going to make decisions a little bit differently. Neither of us were really delaying any decisions. Here I made what ended up being tough because at the end, and hindsight's always 20/20, but if you end up losing on a mill out by 1 or 2 cards, every discard to try to get a more optimal hand is just so tough against a mill deck. The force throw is nice. It's great to get, especially if I can get my dice out before she does. I don't think that happened at this turn, in this round. But later rounds, I had a situation where the force throw special prevents you from wanting to roll out characters. A Jehah Partisan showing a 2, a Chance Cube showing a 3, even a Rieekan showing a 2.
Yes, all of those can be really bad for me, especially when you're getting close to the end and your characters are running a little lower on health. That was definitely a card that was a little bit of a pain to work around.
If anyone's curious, totally off topic from the game, the reason why I rotate my cards 3 times around instead of just 1 time to the right is because the Q button is a lot closer to my finger, which actually rotates your cards to the left, but I'm so used to seeing them to the right. So it's actually just a convenience thing. Every time I play on Tabletop Simulator, I think about how I rotate them 3 times instead of just 1 to the right. Neither of you probably noticed or cared about that at all, but now you're going to see it every time I activate a character.
Oh, I noticed. I just wasn't going to. I wasn't going to say anything. I was going to let the viewers comment about it.
Kylo did not roll damage by himself very well this game, which was tough because I had to keep using Talzin's ability to turn his dice to damage. Ideally, with 3 damaged sides with Kylo, I want him to roll damage on his own and then use Talzin's die to either maximize that damage a little bit better or even just turn her own dice to damage.
And because he was not rolling damage very consistently, that is why I chose to take out that Sith Holocron special as opposed to taking out Kylo's dice. There was nothing showing damage, and so I believe it was Indomitable that I played. It was better off for me to not risk him getting something else out that was going to mess with my dice.
This was my first experience against this deck. Let's see if since he's the one that posted it, Foof, Phoof, that posted it on Star Wars Destiny Deck Builder. Kudos on the deck on that 3-character mill. He took that to 2nd place at Portland Regionals. Was really impressed on it. When I first saw it, I initially thought, why play that instead of just 2 dice on each of Rieekan and Yoda, and this deck just has so much survivability, and then just keeps whittling away on those mills.
Because the yellow cards that Jehah Partisan brings into the game are minimal, but having that third character out there seems to give it some more staying power.
Very minimal in numbers, but definitely important in effects that they had. You've already seen Diso play Hyperspace Jump and Easy Pickings just in this game against me. You'll see both of those cards played again, and both of them wrecked my turns. And those are the only yellow cards in this current build.
But they're completely worth it.
Absolutely.
I don't know that... I think maybe once in both games I actually discarded a yellow card to re-roll or didn't want to use the yellow card. I think that the yellow cards that are in there are completely... they can be very, very, very great clutch cards in terrible situations.
Now this here, sorry if I can interrupt, the Unyielding, I think, is going to be one of your MVPs against, or any kind of unblockable damage. I was able to do this against Yoda here when a lot of decisions are made based on, can I survive? And you've got to think and consider what your opponent could have in their hand, but you can't just always assume that cards in the hand are going to prevent your character from staying alive. And so the Unyielding allowed me to sneak damage underneath Yoda when it didn't look like I had lethal damage showing.
I was going to say that card did some great work for you in both games. It's definitely something that is worth including in anything that is it is blue villain. It makes it so your damage is much more effective, especially with all the shields that heroes are generating these days.
So here, in this round specifically, I think I've already discarded twice to reroll now. It's such a difficult decision, because I don't want to discard my cards. Oh, there he goes. But I need more damage showing. I need to get that damage through, and running against a clock of losing my own cards. But looking back, I think first game I would have definitely discarded to reroll fewer times. Another interesting note about Talzin's ability, if you are going to discard to reroll, and not everyone's playing against Mill, Talzin's dice themselves have a focus as well as 2 damage sides. So generally I like to focus the Kylo dice to 2 damage. Obviously, if he rolls it by himself, then I don't need to. But because if I discard to reroll on the Talzin dice, then I can still use that focus to get what I need to eventually. A lot of dead cards against Mill. Here I think this deck runs 2... Actually, let me just look at it. I've got 2 Rise Agains, 2 Force Illusions, and 2 Witch Magics. So I've got 6 cards for either survivability, healing, and none of those cards are effective against Mill.
It is interesting how much your gameplay changes and what's valid in your deck when you play a deck that has a different win condition like that.
I think last round when I hit the Yoda, started my streak of, I think I got the Kylo correct 3 or 4 times in a row this game, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. And there's the first entrenched.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that card is worth its weight in gold.
I also found it interesting that you chose to go for Rieekan instead of the Partisan, only in the fact that with the shields on the Partisan, Rieekan was still discarding the top card of your deck.
Yeah, I think, again, in my mind, that's kind of like the idea of, do you go against the character who has Guardian, or do you still just say, well, they're going to do their thing anyway, I need to go against the character who's doing the work, mm-hmm. And Rieekan's still the one that is consistently doing that discard. I would love to hear from the listeners and anyone who views this video. Let us know who in this deck, specifically maybe in this matchup, but even just in, if you were to sit down on the table before any cards were drawn, if you were thinking of who you want to go after, who do you focus on in this deck? I just feel like in order of threat, it's Yoda, Rieekan, Partisan. Perhaps that may have been Rieekan, Yoda, Partisan.
So you were saying that one of the cards that you would change in the deck that you were running was Dark Council?
My personal opinion, maybe the extra focus helps get you the damage that you need. I would love to hear from those who have extensive work on playing this deck, but I think that it was, as I see it, I never felt compelled to play it in either of these matchups. And again, this is limited experience against one very specific deck, but I think I would have replaced Dark Council. See if I can come up with what we'll come back to that topic. I'll see what I may choose to include.
Yeah, this mill deck is just relentless on shield generation, with air superiority entrenched. Field medic just to get those healing out. The staying power is pretty incredible. Mill has definitely come a long way over the last few months as these new cards and new tricks come into play.
I can't tell from where we're looking right now, but I think that the reason I had not activated the Jehah Partisan at this point was because you were showing a special on force throw. I can't tell if that's this turn or not. Yeah,
that's just right there. Yeah, just focused it to the special.
Then I would say that probably giving that shield was a misplay at this point. I probably should have activated the Jehah Partisan just so that I could have gotten that chance cube out and had a turn to potentially get those resources before you had a chance to focus into the force throw, because I believe this is the spot here where I have to make a hard decision of, am I willing to risk taking 3 damage to get those resources? And force throw can be very powerful in controlling resource generation for this deck, because 3 damage is a lot when you're trying to prevent every bit.
Agreed.
Good thing Chance Cube doesn't always have to be played when you activate.
Very true. Which is exactly what I chose to do at this point. I decided it wasn't worth it to risk getting 3 damage thrown in my face. It was better to maybe get 2 and get the chance of even a 1 so I could potentially discard out of the hand. And even if you threw 2 into my face, it was still discarding 1 off the top of your deck. Yeah, that was the plan with that. So it was worth it to keep Chance Cube in my hand at that point.
Again, I want to give major kudos to the top 4 player that ran this Kylo Talzin deck. The question was posed, so I'll chat about a little bit about what I would look to include potentially instead of the Dark Council that I don't like. I do hesitate to change a deck without giving it several plays first, especially when that deck has shown a track record of winning. But as I'm looking at some blue villain neutral cards, I think that Hate with redeploy after you activate attached character, deal damage to another character. Force Rend with the ability to spend resources to discard a support or an upgrade. That also has range damage to help with Talzin's ability. And then the third option, and probably the strongest that I can see, is an Heirloom Lightsaber. Heirloom's great. It has redeploy if it's on a blue character. Both the characters are blue. On top of that, all of these meet the odd cost for Talzin's ability, which is why I chose these ones. All of the damage sides on the Heirloom Saber, which there are 3 of them, are all black damage sides, no modifier, so you don't have to worry about if Kylo's dead and you only have the Talzin out there with no melee damage. I know the build is, and the obvious, the answer there is the build is more of a holocron package. However, it still does run It Binds All Things and generates some resources, so the Heirloom Lightsaber could play into the It Binds All Things without hurting the amount of, with still having plenty of targets for your holocrons. I don't know. Any initial impressions on any of those three for deck options for this deck?
I think that it all depends on your play style. I think that different people have different ways they like to play, and I think that whoever put this together really likes being able to control what their dice do. That's the reason I would think for the Dark Council, and then allows them to draw to that holocron with the Dark Council special if they don't get it in their first hand.
Here's our second entrench this game already.
Oh,
so that's 10 more damage to try to get through.
The gentleman who designed this deck and ran it to, I have to say kudos. That had to be an exhausting day of destiny. I'm sure you're used to this deck, but there's a lot of tiny decisions that you make as you go through on a mill deck that are can be exhausting long term. So really great job on running this through. There's no autopilot at all on a mill deck. There's you make a bad decision and you can end up losing the entire game. So congratulations.
The other thing, I mean, while it's definitely true that you got to make the right decisions, the nice thing about this deck is, the removal are good choices with that unbreakable, with the amount of shields you get. You have the obvious heal that comes with red characters. The hyperspace jump is a great include that as Diesel mentioned earlier, I wouldn't immediately look at, or excuse me, I think that was Jason that mentioned that some of those cards are getting to see play again. But yeah, I'm impressed with this deck list. As you play it, as we're getting closer towards the end of this round, what are cards, now that you saw most of the deck, what were cards that you think, okay, yes, I'm getting ready to play my next game, I want to make sure I see this card early on, other than the C-3PO that you mentioned?
Gosh, that's I would love to have seen Chance Cube earlier than I did. As people will see, we're getting towards the end of this game, and I didn't see C-3PO for the entire game. But the Chance Cube would have made it so I could have afforded some of the shield generation maybe a little earlier and kept Yoda alive a little longer, which would have made it go faster. I can see that there's a lot of potential in this deck to go very quickly. I might put in a second All Quiet on the front, just because mine, unfortunately, bad luck, got discarded out of my hand. And had I been able to take off the top of the deck the amount of shields that I had, say, after an entrenched, that would have, again, finished this game faster. But I think that's probably more play style than anything that's wrong with this deck at all. It's very hardy.
So I think this speaks to the survivability of the Rieekan deck, as well as the damage output that the Kylo deck can do. She's played 2 entrenched and a hyperspace jump that avoided, I believe we added it up, and I think it was either 10 or 14, I don't remember which. So, an extra 20 damage that was avoided by 3 great cards.
Now, in this game, if I remember correctly, you were much higher up on deck count than Seth was. I'm just curious,
yes.
with looking for C-3PO, why did you not start ditching your hand quicker to try and get through your deck faster?
I'm sure a more aggressive player than myself would do so. However, I did not see any cards in my hand that didn't have value. And I generally was getting by okay without C-3PO. And since I wasn't having too much of an issue discarding without C-3PO, I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I'm getting to the bottom of my deck. I still don't have C-3PO, and gosh, I could really use that entrench that I discarded, 3 turns ago. Or I could have used that removal that I discarded a few moves ago. The deck he's playing has the potential for a whole lot of damage in one turn. And it felt like throwing away good tools to dig too hard for C-3PO. I think it's probably a playstyle difference. A lot of people would have just dug for him.
Here's another, also, I mean, as it turned out, and that's where you have to make those tough decisions. As we find out that she looks after the end of the game, she would not have found it until her bottom 5 cards. Here's another round that I just wanted that damage so bad. I could see the low number of shields. I knew that she was going to pull more shields later, and so I discarded, I would say, maybe two too many cards this round to try to get an extra 2 or 3 damage. Did do some good damage this round, but still, Kylo did not roll well this entire game, and just was not great. So I think here I know I discard at least one more time. What about your perspective, Jason? Obviously, you got to see the whole board. Anything sticking out at you, or any plays that any thoughts here at this point? I mean, we're getting towards the end of this game. When you get to see both hands, you got to know what each person should or shouldn't have done.
I don't know about should or shouldn't have. I found it interesting that it didn't seem like the Kylo Talzin could get the large swing of damage it has potential to as consistently as one would like. And since she was doing so well on shield generation, it was just so hard to kind of barrel through that. I almost feel like
that was a cocked die reroll, if anyone was wondering.
Rieekan seems like a character you'd want to target first in this pairing, but Rieekan's no good without the other 2 characters. The only problem is it's going to take longer to get through those guys. So, I mean, I guess that's where the challenge lies: is do you go after the one causing the problem, or, I mean, either way, I wonder if he was still the right target at this point. For me, he's either the first or the last.
It's the same for me. When I go after a mill deck with an aggro deck, I usually I either take out Rieekan first, or if they are doubling down on shields on him, then I take out his supports. The most helpful first, and then the least helpful, because that makes his ability absolutely useless.
There you go. Good advice. This one I did hit some damage, but again, through a tough discard, I think this one actually I did discard, ended up killing Rieekan here. So this felt good. We'll see if it ended up paying off for me, but I did end up getting the last 3 damage that I needed to kill Rieekan here. Just misunderstood and forgot that Rieekan has 11 health instead of 10. But again, at this point, I think I've discarded a reroll more times than I would like to in a mill deck. Sometimes you just don't get all the good rolls that you need. But yeah, good advice. I personally haven't played against a mill deck. Still at this point, knowing that I think she's going to field medic as well. So having to go through an extra, it ended up being, I don't know, even if you don't include the hyperspace jump, because that wasn't damage that was dealt and then regenerated with shields, I would say that we had to go through an extra 15 damage. So I think that while Jason's feedback is great and right on target, that it just speaks to the inclusion of the easy pickings. Because like he said, this is speaking to his comment that I couldn't get that big damage turn all at once. And the two times that I thought I had gotten there, the easy pickings just wrecked my turn. Or if I was building up to that big turn, the hyperspace jump ruined me there.
So I thought it was interesting that one of the cards that's included in this deck is the scrap pile, which after you discard the top card of a deck, it allows you to gain a resource after you exhaust that support. I read in the notes that the gentleman who put this deck together said that this is, a great card if you get it early game, because with Rieekan, that's an additional resource every single every single round, as long as you've got some shields on somebody. I think it was more useful to me in the second game. This game, when you draw it late, it basically is just there to use for a discard to reroll if you need to. This late in the game, it really isn't going to serve a whole lot of purpose. I've lost both of my people who can discard off the top of the deck unless I roll some indirect damage. So it was interesting, though. And here I have a misplay because I forgot that it was, I believe, number of shields determines the Indomitable. So I had to choose a different target than originally I would have used.
We all have those Freudian slips, just for the viewers. She means unbreakable, and the 2 times that she called it Indomitable.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that, guys. It's a little harder to read it as we're re-watching.
Obviously, the 3 resources she just got there, if I would have had that Force Throw special out again, oh man, so many unfortunate rolls this game. But that's the way it goes. You can't blame a game on bad rolls. Obviously, both players have to roll dice. This is a fun game. I still felt, and going in here, I started my turn with 3 cards, and I still felt like going into this final round that I had a chance to do enough damage to kill off that Partisan. At this point, I assume you're just discarding to hope to find another disrupt or discard side.
Yeah, I was looking for another discard side if I could find it, or even just to, at this point, get me close enough that I can get C-3PO out, because it's really coming down to, can I get the cards out of your hand without C-3PO? And there's only one side on the Partisan that has a discard, so it's kind of chancy at this point.
Being able to use the focus on the crystal ball instead of any of the Talzin dice was nice. I love that crystal ball include. At this point, obviously, I'm not afraid of that indirect damage. I'm not going to do any kind of consequence. I don't have any cards in my deck. And still, with just these 4 dice left, I still had a chance to reroll and get enough damage to kill that Partisan, but it is not looking like it was going to happen.
And at this point for me, I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to mill him out this turn, so I might as well get him down to 1 card, make things a little easier for next turn. At this point, I was still hoping C-3PO was going to, show up and give me that chance to mill that out or something. But it was pretty close at this point, because I was not sure I was going to get what I needed to keep the Partisan alive. So when I saw Field Medic pop up in my hand, that made me really, really happy.
Towards the end there, the disrupt was done just because I figured if I knew that she was only going to be able to discard 1 more card, so I figured I'd have an entire extra turn to try to use my dice again. You've got 8 dice to roll, with 3 of them having focus sides and 4, 5, 6 of them having damage sides. So the fact that I couldn't finish off this Partisan was just one of those games of Destiny you actually love to watch. It's tough being the person playing it, but really came down to the wire here.
So at this point, I have 2 removals in my hand, one of which requires me to have more ready characters than him with flank, and the other which requires me to exhaust my own character. Obviously, I knew timing was going to be an issue, so I bought myself some time by giving myself a shield. I still hadn't pulled the other Spirit of Rebellion out so that I could get 2 shields from that. And then I figured, based on what he rolled, would depend on whether I would exhaust my character to get rid of 2 dice, or I would heal myself up on the next turn.
So I did name Gray there, got some even more damage out. Then she field medicked. I had lethal damage showing, and again, just cannot believe that with 2 damage left on this Partisan that I could not finish this off. But of course, once I activate Talzin, I guess we'll talk about that play when it gets there. Sorry, go ahead, Disa.
Oh, no. So at this point, all I can do is really, really hope that he does not roll enough damage to kill my Partisan, or doesn't roll enough damage on, more than 2 dice. His other dice were showing, I believe, Force Throw was showing a special, and then you had a Disrupt, and then it just really comes down to Talzin. I know she can't use her ability unless she can use it off my deck, and I have no dice in the pool.
And there it was. So a single focus would have done that here. So all 3 of those dice have focus. 2 of them have 2 damage sides. A single focus would have won the game. She saw that I didn't get the focus. She claims and discards the last card in my hand, and nothing I can do about that.
So very fun, very close game towards the end, and you will see that C-3PO was just kind of chilling at the bottom of the deck.
Good battlefield choice. The hyperspace jump to get your battlefield back into play, and then here's me just... it doesn't even show the footage. I'm throwing my dice off the table out of frustration. Yeah, really good game on that first one. Good battlefield choice to the person making the deck, and really had a lot of fun there.
That concludes this match between Disa, who is playing Jedi Partisan Yoda Rieekan, a hero mill deck, against Seth, who is playing Kylo 2 Mother Talzin. Please join us for the second part of this video, where the two battle it out yet again.